Yesterday, I really spoke primarily about how science is reaching and catching up with universal spiritual experiences to reveal the unified nature of all reality. And when we talk about non-duality, I'd like to sort of perhaps offer a perspective, because I heard this morning from these amazing, amazing women, this sense of the masculine and feminine. For me, non-duality or duality is about the perceived separation of mind and matter. The perception that somehow consciousness is immaterial and physical reality is the material reality. It's that perception of duality that I feel we're moving beyond in terms of science and spirit coming together. So when I talk about duality and non-duality, it's in that sense of, do we perceive, understand, experience, embody the world as separate? Or do we perceive that me and we, the wonderful uniqueness of the me and the diversity, the wondrous diversity of the we, all are microcosmic co-creators of a unified reality? So hearing these inspiring women this morning really brought me back to the way the world is from its discrimination of unity. In other words, unity expressed through diversity. And that diversity, the teaching, the Tao Te Ching says, in the beginning was the one became two, the two became three, and from the three, 10,000 things were born. Virtually all of the ancient spiritual traditions explore this understanding that of the oneness of unified reality, there is the appearance, the manifestation that appears as perhaps a different form of duality. But in fact, if we think of duality, we immediately feel of that separation. If we then perhaps move from duality to polarity, we still maybe think of a magnet and the North and the South Pole. They're somehow connected, but not. And then perhaps we move from that to complementarity, to relativity, where we can see the relationships between the two-ness and the three-ness and the 10,000 thingness that are born of them. So the ancient Indian tradition is about that Ida and the Pingala of the divine feminine and masculine. But in the Sushumna, they reconcile. They integrate in a sacred marriage that births the child, the Sushumna. And all through the ancient spiritual understandings, we get this. We get all the pantheons of the world playing out through the divine feminine and masculine, but there is this sense that as they integrate, whether it's geometrically as the Vesica Pisces or through that sacred marriage of the masculine and feminine, then the child is born. Whether it's whatever it is, that is the Trinity, and it's that Trinitarian co-creativeness that from that 10,000 things are born. So I just wanted to have that perspective, because sometimes we do see masculine and feminine somehow in duality relationship. And I would say it's at its healthiest, it is complementary. There are two pillars that lift the sky. And speaking about two pillars that lift the sky brings me to a profound archetypal experience of this perceived duality between masculine and feminine. The ancient Greek myths talk that before the Olympians were the archons, the ancient ones. And the ancient ones were led by Gaia and Uranus. And Uranus was a sexy beast. And he wanted Gaia to have more and more and more children. And the legend goes that she just got tired of giving birth to all these children. So she actually went to a bit of an extreme. She actually asked one of her children, Saturn, to cut off the testicles of Uranus, which he did. and he threw them into the ocean. And where they landed, Aphrodite was born, the goddess of love. But she came in two aspects. She came as Aphrodite Pandemis, the archetype of human love, with all its pains, with all its joys, but all of that. And she also came born as a twin, Aphrodite Urania, divine love. But in that schism between Gaia and Uranus, which was, of course, the earth and the sky, that let through the Olympians. They won the battle. The children of Gaia and Uranus won the battle. Yeah, the Greek gods that we know them, the Olympians. And the punishment that was given to one of their own who sided with this ancient, more ancient archetypal understanding was the god Atlas. And the god Atlas, his punishment was to forevermore separate earth from sky. And so when we see sculptures of Atlas, we often see him bent down with the earth on his shoulders. That isn't the original. The original had him separating earth from sky, this physical realm from the cosmos. And some years back, I really tuned into this and felt that this was so primordial in our experience of the way in which the feminine and the masculine interplay and relate to each other, that I actually dragged my husband to the Atlas Mountains, named after Atlas. And there, on the St. Valentine's Day, the day of love, we went to the top of Mount Atlas. And we loved each other as Gaia and as Uranus, and brought that love into grounding and hopeful release. And I feel that this is where we are now, with all of the history of the pain between the masculine and the feminine. And I'm one of those, there's enough blame to go round sort of gals. So for me, in any relationship, it's never one-sided. It's always some to and fro. But now I would suggest that it is the time, and hearing these amazing women, but also, you know, the thing with the Ida and the Ida, the Bikala and the Sushumna, is that they are our meridians, whether we're gender-born man or gender-born women. They are archetypal principles that flow through our universe of experience. And even if they're not manifested in a biological way in human beings or many other biological forms, they go back to the very beginning. We have the positive, the negative, and the neutral as intrinsic principles of our universe. You know, when we think of light, we think of light as electromagnetic fields, but the electric and the magnetic are at right angles to each other. In esoteric understanding, the electric is the positive, the yang. The magnetic is the negative, the yin. But the light itself flows in a third direction. Of itself, it is that neutral child of the electric and the magnetic fields. Even atoms are made up of positive protons and negative electrons, but crucially, we would not have energy and matter in the form that we have in our universe without the neutral neutron. So these complementarities play out on every scale as differentiation of unity rather than of themselves duality. And when we actually understand that and learn to complement that, it feels that in many ways we have an amazing opportunity to heal our collective psyche from that place of complementarity, and then birth the cosmic child within each and every one of us and within our collective psyche. And I want to come back to that all in about 15 minutes, when I'll be getting the card up. But before that, I really would like to perhaps share the story of our universe as a finite thought form in the mind of God, as we were coming to yesterday, with its beginning 13.8 billion years ago, not as a big bang, but as a big breath. A breath of consciousness. Everything is consciousness. Mind is matter. Matter is mind. So by co-creating this amazing opportunity for consciousness to co-create, to exist and evolve in ever greater levels of complexity, I'd like to share just the beauty, the exquisiteness of that, of a universe that is truly as simple as it can be, but no simpler, but from which innate, perfect simplicity, its balance of complementarities, its balance of symmetries and asymmetries, all that we call physical reality has arisen and evolves and goes on. So if we go back to that very beginning, 13.8 billion years ago, when all the energy and matter that our universe needed to exist was there from the get-go, all that's happened 13.8 billion years on to us is that it's changed its form. You know, we often talk about ourselves being stardust. A few weeks ago, it was discovered that the matter that makes us up isn't just matter from our solar system or even matter left over from supernova in our galaxy. Half the matter that makes us up is extragalactic. Hello. Literally, we are, but not just that, each and every one of us, in that sense, is 13.8 billion years old. And are the days, ladies, when, or even gentlemen, when we wake up and think, my God, that's so true. But that is the reality of it, that's the literal reality of it. Every atom that makes us up, not in its atomic form, but in all the energy and matter that was there at the beginning, is now comprising us, comprising Gaia, comprising soul, comprising all that we call physical reality. What is very different is that 13.8 billion years ago, our universe began in its lowest informational content, its lowest informational entropy. And the thing about entropy and informational entropy as the informational content of our universe is that it's inexorably increased ever since. Our universe has been on a journey from simplicity to complexity, to ever greater levels of self-awareness embodied within it. And when we look at how exquisite this beautiful co-creation of the cosmos is, when as cosmologists we look back, we see that the forces that interplay within our universe are fine-tuned. And I don't mean fine-tuned like my mum's chocolate cake was fine-tuned. She made such great chocolate cake, and she actually did it so she never had to weigh anything. She'd got to the state where she, put flour in and sugar in, the rest of it, by sight, by hand. And being the nerd I am, I calculated that she probably got that accurate to about 1 in 100. Yeah, she was accurate to 1%, which is pretty darn good. Our universe is accurate, fine-tuned, to 1 in 10 to the 27. That's 1 part in 1 followed by 27 zeros. That is pretty accurate. That is pretty fine-tuned. But it's because it's so fine-tuned that it's been able to evolve ever since. And when we look at that initial fine-tuning, it was so beautifully done that it had just enough difference to enable seed points for stars and galaxies to form. Just enough, but not too much. And then when stars were formed, the way they burned their hydrogen fuel was just enough and not too much. There's a rate of fuel burn in stars that's something like 0.007%. That's a very accurate way of burning fuel. If it had been 0.0006% or 8%, then we wouldn't be here. Stars would have just burned up and died and would not have been able to give rise to us. So again, everything through our universe, everything through that 13.8 billion years has been exact and patterned to the extent that about 5 billion years ago, all the nutrients, all the richness of elements were there, ready to start forming planetary systems. Because when the first couple of generations of stars, they were like rock stars. I went to a NASA conference the other day and gave a talk there, and they call themselves stars. They call themselves rock stars, these NASA astronauts, right? But these early generations of stars, literally, they burnt bright, they died young. They blew up and they seeded the interstellar medium with their richness of elements. But that wasn't enough. It took 2 or possibly 3 generations of stars to do that, to allow the interstellar birthing clouds for planetary systems like ours to form. And not just the age of stars is crucial to this, because too soon, and they can't do that. They're not bright enough, they don't live long enough, they just can't form those interstellar clouds. Even the frequency and power of the explosions of earlier stars are exactly right, because their shock waves shepherd the interstellar medium into birthing clouds. Too powerful, they disperse. Too weak, they don't cluster. Everything from the get-go on that process to 5 billion years ago of our universe got to the point where planetary systems such as ours and many, 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 many others could form, because there weren't the heavier elements to create rocky planets. So there weren't the environments to enable liquid water to be present, to enable the sort of prebiotic molecules to be present, to be able to go on to that next chapter of the evolution of self-awareness to be born. But because of that history, because of that journey and to that point, there were. And what's interesting that as cosmologists, we now realize that from that beginning 13.8 billion years ago to 5 billion years ago, our universe had begun in the Big Breath with accelerating space. And then, as it became bigger, it became decelerated. But 5 billion years ago, what we call dark energy, its power kicked in. And we now know that from about 5 billion years ago, space began to accelerate its expansion again. Now, what I was saying yesterday is the expansion of space and the flow of time is all about the ability of our universe to embody ever more complexity, ever greater complexity, ever more levels of self-awareness. I find it quite interesting that our universe went into overdrive around the time that our solar system was being born, but not just ours, because if we look, as I say, not just throughout our galaxy, but I think over the next few years, as we're able to look beyond that, we'll realize that around 5 billion years or so was the time by which rocky planetary systems, able to be the home of biological beings such as ourselves, were beginning to form. And so that expansion of space as being a realization of increasing consciousness within our universe seems to have gone into overdrive from that point. But of course, when planetary systems form, there is masses of water. There was an experiment done to analyze water a couple of years ago, and the results suggested that half the water in our bodies is older than our solar system. Just think about that for a moment. So not are we made of extragalactic stuff and 13.8 billion years of stuff. The water in our bodies, half of it is older than our solar system. We literally are embodied cosmos. We literally are children, microcosmic co-creators of the consciousness of the whole world. But from that 5 billion years ago until now, what evolutionary biologists, what many, many other researchers are discovering is that it is information, which is more fundamental than energy, matter, space, time, that is the stuff of reality, consciousness, playing out informationally, not random data, but informed, dynamic, intentional, meaningful patternings, ever greater levels of complexity that are playing through until now. So we're at this point. We're at this point of crisis, which is both danger and opportunity in the Chinese glyph. We're at this point, hopefully, of healing the traumas of our perceived separations. And we are at that point, perhaps, of breakdown or breakthrough. And maybe it's both, and maybe it's neither, and maybe whatever. But the point is, and I suspect I'm getting close to my time, is I just want to complete with a perception of what happens when a system gets to an unsustainable point. And to give you an example of that, I mentioned yesterday that underlying all the patterning, all the fractal patterning of the appearance of the physical world are non-physical attractors, basins of information, basins of consciousness expressing itself. And there's one such pattern that underlies the weather. And you may have heard the idea that a butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil could cause a tornado in the US. Well, the reason for understanding that is that such complex systems such as the weather are non-linear. In other words, a small cause can create a big effect, or vice versa. Underlying the weather is literally an attractor that looks like this. And if you just do this, just play this pattern out in front of your eyes, and just have a sense that if you're holding it within certain boundaries, nonetheless you never make the same path through the pattern. It's always slightly different. It's always slightly different how it crosses. And that's why we get the variation of the weather, but within the overall sustainable pattern. The problem is those patterns are only sustainable to a certain extent in any complex system. And our collective psyche is part of the complex system that is our universe. We are very multifractal, we're very complex in that sense. But our collective psyche has played out a paradigm of experience, a different shape to what's called the Lorentz attractor, but nonetheless a circle of going round and round and round with various variations, but certainly within boundaries. But those boundaries are breaking down now. Our perception of duality is breaking down those boundaries. They cannot hold. So the question when a complex system gets to that point, it either breaks down into chaos, of which there is order and something new will come, or it breaks through to a higher level of coherence. And what happens in those non-physical planes is the possibility of that higher level of coherence starts to form, starts to crystallize. But like me, when I try and give up chocolate biscuits, the old paradigm, which is breaking down, is almost trying to reach for that higher coherence and falling back, and reaching and falling back. And that's called flickering. That's called flickering. And I perceive that where we are within our collective psyche is that flickering. We're crystallizing the possibility of that higher coherence, where we remember the unity of the whole world, where we're beginning to experience it and step by step embody it. And while that is being crystallized and potentialized and empowered, the old is falling away. Kali is doing her work. So the question for us is, how do each of us, and I think we've all been saying this, how do each of us, in whatever way we feel able, to go out in the world and empower that flickering into that higher level of coherence, that possibility? Do we fall away, fall apart in fear? Or do we leap into love together? And that, I feel, is our choice. That is our crisis. And that is our opportunity. So thank you, everyone.